We do have a few minutes that we can take some questions for either Trish or Jen, if anyone has some. Jessica.
I want to say both of the presentations were great, and the energy and the positive.
Hang on.
The microphone.
Oh, this isn't testimony. This is just, okay.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Sanchez.
Mike is coming.
As I was saying, they were both great presentations, and your energy and the positive messages that came across, and I hate to ask this question afterwards, actually, I probably should have waited. With all the successes that you've had, there must have been one or two that didn't quite get off the ground, and I was wondering if there were some lessons learned and things to avoid when you're trying to build partnerships together.
So you're looking for partnerships that didn't get off the ground, not projects.
Well, both, yeah.
Yeah. I think there are, do I need to?
They're live.
I really struggle to think about any local partnerships that didn't work out, except maybe around resources. There have been some times where you thought certain resources were coming and people kind of formed and organized and you try and do something and then it doesn't pan out, and you know, I still wouldn't say it failed, because for us, you know, it still formed a new local partnership. And one of the things I've found is that that's still really valuable, because you never know when the opportunity is going to come back. And now you have that group of people that you sort of prepared. Now, I'll give an example of that. This is actually a success story, but in the Schuylkill Action Network, we had groups of people working intensely on problems, and I'll use the example of the agriculture work group, a group of probably about a dozen people already working on putting BMPs on farms and prioritizing and working together with, some people did the planning part, some people did the actual work, some people did the funding pieces, and had that in place when William Penn started their Delaware River Watershed Initiative, and then they called it, the Middle Schuylkill Cluster. So they had a new name for it, but because we had that group there, we basically were very quickly able to, convince the foundation that group was the right group to move that, to kind of serve as the organizing partner for the cluster. But also to jump right in on doing the work. It was already being done. So, that was just a good example that it was there, ready there and waiting. I guess, I have been involved in some larger level sort of collaborations that, again, I don't know that I would say that they failed, but they really struggled. And the one I think is a success at this point, and so I won't say what it is, but early on, it was a real struggle and it was a real time drain, because we didn't take the time at the beginning to get everybody's priorities on the table of, this is what I want out of this and this is what I need to participate. We didn't do that. So we just launched into people working together, and for the next 3 years, couldn't get anything done. And then finally, you spent, instead of spending a few meetings doing that and then moving on to the work, you spent years figuring out that was what the problem was that was holding things back. So that's probably my best example.
Yeah, and for me, I have some small examples, but one of the things in quality assurance at times is getting data back that you don't expect those results, and looking at that and having to realize that you're not chain of custody forms alone was one of our biggest struggle, and filling them out appropriately and making sure that people were doing that appropriately. And even though you trained them and you told them and you showed them, you would still have certain people that just weren't following those directions. And at times you have to look at yourself and say, well, it can't always be somebody else. I'm not communicating something effectively and taking that time. And that was something that we, and that goes for volunteers and professional staff. That's not something that's unique to volunteers. Sometimes it's just the way it is of doing water monitoring. And then I know in early Blitz days, I did have an experience where we had a huge group that was supposed to come out to a cleanup at Long Swamp Creek, and myself and another DEP staff member were there, and it just ended up being us. But you know what? We picked up what we picked up and we moved forward. But the bigger, those are kind of small examples, but for me, the bigger thing for our work at the department, I feel like we have a charge and we move forward, and kind of what Jennifer had said is at certain times the priorities line up. So being ready when those priorities line up with what you're interested in, having a project ready to go, and keeping on your path till the time is right, I think is really important. And you know, funding comes for different places for different reasons, and interest comes from different places for different reasons. So kind of keeping forward your work and having it ready when the time is right for it to become your success story. And that's something that I've learned in my time.
Thank you both. There's one other thing I would just, as a footnote from what I know that the estuary program does really, really, really well, and that's communicating. And they, maybe because they're not a regulatory program and a government agency that's stuck in with regulations and acronyms and things like that,
Yeah.
but learning how to speak at the right level for the public to understand what it is you're doing. You don't have to put it out there in technical terms, but the estuary program is especially good at doing that, at pushing that forward. So
Thank
thanks,
you.
Jen.
Yeah, it's true. I would agree.
Yeah, thank you both. Very interesting. And I just have a question about the estuary program. I just want to understand. Oh, my name is Chris Sturm, S-T-U-R-M, from New Jersey Future. How is it structured and funded? It sounds like it's quasi-governmental. You get a lot of government funding, but it's public-private, perhaps?
Yeah, it's interesting. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So from a technical standpoint, it's nonprofit. As the designated estuary program, we get some funding from EPA that comes through EPA. It gets appropriated by Congress as part of the Clean Water Act, and that's a whole process in and of itself. But for us, that funding is usually about a quarter to a third of our funding. So the rest of our funding, we write grants, we have fundraisers, we send out appeals, so we're a nonprofit organization with a special relationship to the agencies in the region because of that, and you know, it's part of the requirements of us being an estuary program that we have and maintain these collaborative relationships with the agencies in particular, but really with all the stakeholders that we work with. But we still are a nonprofit organization, and if something happened to that estuary program funding, we would continue to operate. There is actually an effort underway in Congress right now to reauthorize the estuary program. So there is an association of national estuary programs in Washington that helps to, helps keep all the programs communicating together around that.
Thank you.
But we are more heavily, even outside the estuary program funding, we're probably more heavily government funding from everything from state down to very local, like Philadelphia, other municipalities, than probably other nonprofit organizations.
About what percentage of your budget?
From a variety of government sources, probably over 80%, yeah.
Stan. No, that's Stan.
I'm Stan Hales, the director of the Barnegat Bay Partnership, and great presentations. We enjoy working with both of you. I would just add that all of the estuary programs are very differently organized. We're not a 501c3. We're a part of Ocean County College. Many of the other estuary programs are housed at academic institutions. One's housed at EPA. Some are housed at state agencies, so they're all differently organized. And that has an impact on how they work.
Any other questions? Dorina?
Thank you. Dorina Frizera, New Jersey DEP. Based on the success of the Barnegat Bay Initiative and the existing collaboration and partnerships that exist in the Delaware, are there any initiatives or lessons learned that you would like to see transferred or be considered for adoption in the future for the Delaware? Both of you. You both have a different perspective and things that might be moved forward. It can be as much as, targeting research or perhaps monitoring networks or
Yeah, I like Jen's challenge about doing a comprehensive monitoring. That would be fantastic. I think the one thing, I remember the first time we had the research forum where we had all the researchers come into one room at the eco complex and report out on the data research that was done. And we had the Watershed Ambassadors program that we host in the department, and we had a watershed ambassador there, and this was kind of her first experience. And talking about the fact that we at the department had people from various aspects of the department focused on this one subject matter, and research focused on this one subject matter, and data and monitoring. And she came out and she said to me, "Gosh, this is how it should always be done." And it really spoke to me, and I was like, this is how it should always be done. And that's kind of how I feel about my experience with Barnegat Bay, is just being able to look comprehensively at an ecosystem like that and focus your energy and your efforts. And for me to be given that opportunity is something that I think continue in. And recognizing the research that had been done, like we said in the beginning, and then just filling in the gaps, not reinventing the wheel, which I think is something that we did really well in Barnegat, was doing that scientific inventory and recognizing that, well, here are the gaps, and let's fill those. Don't just redo everything again, and moving that forward. So that would kind of be, my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I already mentioned in my presentation that, the idea of having a comprehensive monitoring program, and we do have a comprehensive monitoring program now. It's different people doing different pieces, but it's one of those things, it's not enough. It's not what we want, and it is a large system, and it seems like every year there's some piece of it that's threatened by cuts in funding and things like that. So it definitely is very vulnerable. There is sort of a model framework out there for a watershed to ocean monitoring system for the Delaware that we've never been able to implement, partially because of resources, but also coordination. I mean, working across the 3 states and the 2 regions of EPA and with the Basin Commission and the cities there. It is complicated to do, but I do think that I talked to some of the people who were around when the program was first started, like Jonathan Sharp, who's done a ton of monitoring in that system, and I think that they did have a hope that at some point we could have a more comprehensive system with different partners, including industry and volunteers and stuff like that, playing a more organized part of it. So I'm kind of half joking to say I don't know that it would be possible in our system to do that kind of monitoring, but I think some variation on that certainly would be great, or even just trying to solidify and fill a few gaps and get commitments to sustain what we have now would definitely be a major takeaway I would have, that I would love to see. But also, you mentioned the ecosystem model, we've had our Science and Technical Advisory Committee has been talking for years about we don't really have a good model of the ecosystem of the Delaware estuary. We would love to have that. It's a really complex system, so it's not a small piece of work, but that would be another kind of potential component. Stan talked about the difference between estuary programs, and the 28 programs around the country, there are some that are much smaller in one county of one state, kind of area, and then you have ones like us that are multi-state and bigger areas, and we do really different kinds of things. But I have to say that I'm usually jealous of the smaller systems, of their ability to really go deep into it, and especially engaging local volunteers and stuff like that. That's really challenging for us at the scale that we're working. But I do think that citizen science and getting people engaged always has been a part of our mission to get volunteers. And right now, there's EPA has a big focus on trash-free waters, and starting to look more at it as just a way to engage volunteers and people, but also as a way to get them to take a more scientific look at trash. And so those are some of the kinds of things we really would like to get going. And there are some models for how to do it at scale. We do something called the Schuylkill Scrub. It's for the whole Schuylkill, and it has individual communities doing cleanups. We organize it we promote it as a whole. There's a website that attracts volunteers that can sign up to different sites. And so there are some models like that I think could potentially work, not just for cleanups, but for other things. But applying them at scale with full participation by all the partners and the resources needed to do it is definitely a challenge. But if we could do it through that model, we just had to get not just New Jersey DEP on board, but Pennsylvania DEP and the Delaware DNRAC too. and Philadelphia and the DRBC.
I think we're going to limit ourselves to one last question and then take a break because we're beyond our nominal break time. So please, your name
Okay,
and
great. I'm Carrie Lindig. Thank you, ladies. It was a great presentation. I'm just kind of curious. So Jennifer, you are executive director. You're a paid position. It makes sense that you would assume the coordinating roles. So Trish, your title is environmental specialist.
Yes.
So I'm kind of curious, were you designated as a coordinator, or did you assume that role, or what? How did that happen?
It's a good question. So, as I said, when the action plan was kind of proposed, each division that was appropriate to take that action item was given the charge. And so our division was given this charge of adopting more rigorous water quality standards, and we knew we needed to develop a model to do that, which falls within the bureau that I work in. We are kind of regionally based in focus, and so I was someone who my focus in the work that I had previously done in both TMDL development and work related to that previous to this experience was that area of the state. Yeah, I think I fell into it a little bit, but I had experience. I had started with the department doing that kind of work. My first job here was to do education and outreach and to actually run part of our volunteer monitoring program and doing citizen science and getting people out there to do visual assessments. And so I had that experience to pull from. So I don't know if that answers your question, but so I did become that role, and it's something that I really enjoy doing. So, I'd love to do more of it, but yeah. So it was in our bureau. It was in my regional area, and I had the previous experience that kind of made me become that coordinator.
some people are born to greatness and others have greatness blessed upon them.
That's right. That's right.
So let's take a 10-minute break, and then we will come back for testimony. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for our speakers. If we could have another round of applause, please.